Hello everyone, today I'm going to explain the last video, but this time in more detail. In the first video, I used the genie lamp from the Hexicalendon, this one. What it does, it casts a spell every tick, so 20 times per second. Here's a simple example. Here I have two lamps. One of them activates, this one is empty. Just by clicking I need to hold, and the other one is like a toggle switch. So here's a simple spell I made. As you can see, it just pushes you forward at a constant speed. And this one is a toggle, so you just click once and it just stays. You don't even need to hold it. I can even move it to the middle of my inventory and it will still be active. So here's a basic example of how to use it. So all you need to do is just make a spell. So let's make the most basic spell, which is just blink, and that's it. And then the way you upload it to the genie lamp is you do this spell. Now when I hold this one, it will just teleport me forwards. And here I have the same thing. Here I just named it execute and it's the toggle one. So all it does, it reads what left hand and activates it. So when I do this, it will teleport me without me needing to hold anything except what it casts. So in my spell, it has this fun little property that it could remember the last enemy you looked at. So it will follow him. So to do that, I had to first of all find an entity that I'm looking at, and then to check if I want to target that enemy. So here I have two armor stands, and let's just make the first part of the spell. The first part is just to find the entity I am looking at. So here's just a simple entity raycast, and I'm going to print it in my chat. So when I run it, you can see it says null in the chat because I'm not looking at anything. It didn't find an entity. But if I look here, it will say the armor stand with the red part, and here it will say the yellow armor stand. When I want to make my arrows go after an entity, I don't want them to go after themselves. I don't want them to look for other arrows. So if I look at an arrow, I don't want them to start homing. And another thing, I want my spell not to break when I'm looking at nothing. So let's do the first thing. When I look at this entity, it will give my stack and the armor, the entity, I mean. And when I look at nothing, it will give me null. So how can I check if what I'm looking at is an entity? Well, the easiest way is to duplicate the supposed entity so I don't lose it, and then put null on the stack and compare it. And if I compare it, it says it's true, it's the same thing. But if I do the same thing with an armor stand, it will say false because it's not null. So that's how I can check if something is null or not. But the second thing, I need to check it's not an arrow. The way that I did it is I took an arrow. Now you can't directly check if this entity and this entity is the same, because this is a specific entity. And if I take another arrow and compare it, maybe it will give true, but it won't be great because when this arrow disappears, it will become null because this entity doesn't exist. And what I do is I turn it into its type. Now, what you would know this is that different mods add different types, meaning that if there's Hexal, which adds a type mechanic, and there's like probably other mods that add the same thing. Maybe Boriotas even. For example, Hexal, I think, can tell you what this block is by doing this spell. It says white concrete. But at the same time, a different mod may add a different way to do a type. You see, this is white concrete and this is white concrete. It's just different mod adding the same thing, but they just don't work together. And so there's different things. So if you want to compare things, it should work if you just use the same thing. Because if I compare those two, it will say false even though it's the same type. And what's also might be confusing is when you say type, maybe like this spell that I'm about to use in a moment. You see zone hexalation type. It's a hexal spell, so it will want a hexal type, obviously. So again, what I did is selected an arrow and turned it into its type. I'm just going to save it to my offhand. And then, even after I take it, it stays an arrow. So what I can do is I select the armor stand and then I get its type. You see, it's armor stand type, and I compare it to an arrow type. And now it says false because it's not an arrow. If I did the same thing with an arrow, it would say true. But what does the true and false give me? Well, obviously, I want for both to be false. I don't want it to be an arrow and I don't want it to be null. So the first thing I do is check if it's a null. I don't want it to be null, so I do not equal, and it says yes, it is not null. So that's good. You see green wood? Yeah. Take my type and check if it's not an arrow type. And it's again true. And if they're both true, I want to somehow save that entity. I'm going to show you in a bit how I do that, but I do that with IOTA embedding. But how do I do all of that in one spell? So the first thing in the spell is actually where I'm going to store the entity that I'm going to remember, because I want it not to forget when I look away from the entity. So I'm actually going to put this in the start. So I'm going to put a bracket, nothing, and close it, and then just remove it. So this does nothing, just absolutely nothing. This is just a placeholder for an entity that I will place there in the future. Now this is where the spell starts. Of course, I'm going to take the entity that I'm looking at, supposedly an entity. I don't know if I'm looking at an entity yet. To make my life easier, I'm actually going to store it in my Rave Mind. If you don't know what it is, it's just like a focus, but you don't need to hold it in your hand, it's just in your mind, supposedly. And I'm going to take it out. So basically this also did nothing, but now it will be stored in my Rave Mind. So here on the stack right now, all I have is just the entity, supposed entity I'm looking at. So to confirm it's actually an entity, I'm going to place null on the stack and then do inequality check. I'm checking if they are not equal. So now all I have on the stack is nothing, this is nothing, this removed it, and now here I'm checking if it's null. If I'm looking at an entity, right now all my stack will be true, else it will be false. After that, I'm going to put two spells right one after another and just do if this one is true, if this states true, cast the first spell, if it's not, cast the second spell. That's how if statement works. At least that's how I'm doing. I know how to do them. So if this is true, and when I'm looking at an entity, then the second thing I need to check if that entity is an arrow. So what I do is I take my entity that I stored in the Rave Mind, I take its type, and then I want the arrow type. So how do I remember it? I use IOTA embedding once again. So what I do, I have bracket, a temporary thing that I'm going to change in the slicing table and then close bracket, and then I just take everything out of there. So we'll be left just with that. But if I don't put these brackets, it will say right to cast arrow type, but fail, or something along those lines. So now I have a statement with, I have the entity type that I'm looking at, and arrow type. I don't want it to be an arrow type, so I'm checking for inequality. And if it is not an arrow, what I want to do is I want to download the spell, this one, and change this into the entity I'm looking at. So what I do is I'm going to say at index 1 of the spell, change into the entity. And this is the exchange spell. So it will download my spell, the one I'm making right now, it will go to this spot and change it into the entity I'm looking at. And then I want to upload it back. If any time during any spell have to use this spell to upload back, I'd suggest you do a couple backups of the spell so you don't accidentally ruin it. But now, what happens when it is an arrow? What do I do? Well, you don't do anything. You don't want to change this entity. So all you do, this is just an empty spell, an empty list, and then I say, if this stated true, keep this spell, else keep this one. And I just execute, and I close this, and now I have the same thing. I have if it's a null or is it an entity. So if it's an entity, I want to cast this spell, else I don't want it to do anything. So again, now if there are mistakes, it will be pretty problematic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this spell and I'm going to copy it. So if it doesn't work, at least I'll know. So I'm going to cast. Right now it states nothing. I'm going to look at this entity, and you see how it moved. It means it changed, and now it says armor stand. And if I go and over to this one, it will also say armor stand, but this is a yellow armor stand. And if I shoot an arrow, you see that I made a mistake in my spell. Oops, it's a splicing table, not a slicing table. Oh, the reason it bugged out is because I completely forgot that here this was a placeholder for the type. So just remove that and place the arrow type here. So now when I look at this, it should remember the armor stand, and the arrow does nothing. It just doesn't see it. Now it will still detect like snowballs, but that's fine. I don't want it when I'm shooting an arrow to detect that arrow. So this is the first part of the spell. You see, it just detects the entity I'm looking at. Can be used for a flame mine if you wish. So what we did is the first part of the spell. We detected an entity, which was only to find the entity and check if it's viable for our use case. The next step is to move the arrow. So this is a mid-editing orb, and I really hate editing. It's not fun. Been doing it for an hour only to edit 10 minutes. So basically, if you guys really want a part 2, ask in the comments. I just don't believe anyone will make it this far into the video. And I guess yeah. Okay. Good life.